Did you know that before Newton discovered the law of gravity, people could fly? It's true.
Whatever. Was that recorded?
Yes, it was. Well, good morning, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I told the people who are in here, so I'll say it again for the benefit of whoever might decide to watch online, that I did think about not streaming this morning and just sitting around the table and kind of having a round table discussion. It's an interesting portion, and to be completely honest, I did not have a ton of prep time. I will also admit that it's helpful that I have taught this portion before. So I did have some notes I could pull up. I didn't have to start from scratch. So I did pull up my notes from last year from this portion. So, but I figure it's been a year since we've read it. It'll be okay if we talk about some of the same things again. And Lori has requested that we get to the final section about tzitzit, so we're going to do our best to get there. So, yes, so we are in Numbers, starting in Numbers 13. 13, 14, 15 is our portion this morning. So, of course, chapter 13 is a pretty big deal, of course, because it kind of it sets up what kind of some of the rest of the wilderness time is going to be about. So, because of what they do and what they fail to do. So, I won't read this whole thing, but just as our kind of get our brains back into it refresher. So this is, they send, they want to go and investigate the land. So the Lord lets them, says, send some men into the land to check it out. How long do they spend in the land? How many days do they spend in the land? Huh? It is 40 days. So they spend 40 days in the land, which then is why we end up having 40 years in the wilderness.
Was this a test?
I think so. I think we could debate
what idea, wasn't it?
Yes, I think it's both. I think there's something like, I don't remember where the verse is, and I don't know that I wrote it down.
Only because when it first starts out, it says, Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, send some men out. Yeah. And then it says, so according to the word of Adonai, Moses sent them into the wilderness.
Yes. Yes. I thought there was also something that said that they wanted to go, but I may be wrong about that. I don't remember perfectly right now. Anyway, so yes, but the Lord says they can go is the point. So that's good. So that starts off kind of okay, that they can go. It's not against the will of the Lord for them to go and investigate. So they go and they send 2 from each tribe, right? So we have 12 men who are going to investigate the land for 40 days. And there's I do like to point this out. So they are instructed, they are given specific instructions for what they're supposed to do in the land. So verse 17, as he sent them to explore the land of Canaan, he said to them, go up there through the Negev, then go up into the hill country, see what the land is like and the people living there, whether they might be strong or weak, few or many. In what kind of land are they living? Is it good or bad? Also, what about the cities in which they are living? Are they unwalled or do they have fortifications? How is the soil, fertile or poor? Are there trees on it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land, because it was the season for the first ripe grapes. So they're given instruction about what they are to observe about the land, right? Which is good. Like this this makes a lot of sense, right? These are the things you would want to know, especially thinking about the fact that, yes, God is giving you this land, but that doesn't mean that the people who live there are going to agree that these people are given the land. So they really don't know what the situation is going to be when they go try to take this land. They don't really know what that looks like, and so it makes sense that like these are the things that they need to. This is what they need to know, and also the Lord has promised them that it's this really good land, and so they want to see, like, is it producing good fruit, and are we going to be able to, live somewhat comfortably, and well, are we going to be provided for?
You would think that God's already said this land is yours. You would think that there would be red flags going up in their heads when they were told, well, you need to scout out the land and see if it's suitable. Wait, you already gave it to us. If you gave it to us, it's going to be great. Why do we need to scout it out?
I kind of look at it differently.
Okay.
They've been in the wilderness grumbling about being in the wilderness with no provisions. They keep looking back to Egypt thinking it's such a wonderful place. Mm-hmm. So he sends them into this land that he's going to give them. And it's basically, hey, is the land good or is it bad? Bring back some fruit. I mean, check this out. I kind of see it almost like you can go in there and you can look at it like they saw obstacles. Mm-hmm. But in reality, the grapes were so huge, they had to carry it. 2 men had to carry them out. I mean, this land is really plentiful. Mm-hmm. Stop wanting to go back to Egypt to eat garlics and leeks in Egypt. Look, you've got this land that's producing some beautiful stuff. You're not even going to have to start from scratch. You're going to walk in, and this land's already producing for you. And I kind of thought, they could look at it in 2 different ways. They could walk in there and go, like we see how some of this land, this is amazing land that the Lord's sending us into. And so, yeah, that perspective thing, which will play into that, but, was it a test? Maybe. Was it God trying to show them, see, I really do have something good for you? Maybe.
Yes. So I would say yes. Mm-hmm. To both of you, really. Mm-hmm. So I think I actually really like that you brought out both sides of this, because I think all of what you said is what's happening. So I think, and let me define it. So when we say test, I don't know that it's a test. I don't know that the Lord is necessarily testing them, that like there's a right and a wrong answer, even though there is, and we'll talk about the different responses that we're getting. So we're getting there. But I think often when the Lord, quote unquote, tests us, it's not about us passing his test of like getting the right grade or something like that. It's to reveal what's in our hearts. Right? Like you get put in a sticky spot, and you learn a lot about yourself usually. And I think that's a lot of what we see happening here. So I think that there's both sides of this. I think there is the and I think we see this in the responses of the 10 versus Joshua and Caleb, is that yes, there's some that are like, well, the Lord said this is good land. Of course it's going to be good. And there's also, I think, like Lori was saying, they've been asking to go back to Egypt. And so it's kind of, it's a little bit of like, is this really going to be better? Which, again, I think shows us a lot about the condition of our hearts. So we'll continue along this thread here in a second. But let's move on just a little bit and pull in some of their responses real quick before we continue our discussion. So they go into the land. So in chapter 13, verse 26, they traveled and returned to Moses, Aaron, and the entire community of Bnei Israel at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran, and they gave their report to them and the entire assembly, and they showed the land's fruit. They gave their account to him and said, "We went into the land where you sent us. Indeed, it is flowing with milk and honey. This is some of its fruit. Except the people living in the land are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the sons of Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites are living in the mountains, and the Canaanites are living near the sea and along the banks of the Jordan." Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "We should definitely go up and capture the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We cannot attack these people because they are stronger than us." They spread among Bnei Israel a bad report about the land they had explored, saying, "The land through which we passed to explore devours its residents. All the people we saw are men of great size. We also saw there the Nephilim, the sons of Anak are from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our eyes as well as theirs." So think about this response in the context of what they were instructed to do. Remember, they were given specific instructions. And when we start out reading their report, they did what they were told. But they were not instructed to make a judgment on whether or not they could take the land. So, because this is just like at this point, I think the reasonable assumption, I think if any of us were in their place, they haven't been told they're going to spend 40 years in the wilderness yet. Right. So I think their expectation is we're going to scout this because we're about to go. And maybe had they come back with different attitudes and this story had gone differently, maybe they would have. But at this point, they had not been specifically told, okay, it's time to go in the land, so you're we're going to start strategizing. They're like, just go scout it out. You're just supposed to go look and see what's there. And so I think this is what we see, this is the tension that we see here, right? Is that we have the 10 coming back and saying, there's no way. Absolutely not. And we have Caleb coming back and he's like, everything they said is true. And we should go and capture the land. Why does Caleb think they can capture the land when the rest of them don't?
Well, I think God he's already promised them when I go into the land which I am going to give to the sons of Israel. Mm-hmm. So it's about trusting in the Lord and considering, because I think the Lord somewhere says he had a different spirit. Caleb and Joshua had a different spirit than these others who were complaining and not trusting in God. So I think that's it. He trusted in the Lord.
Yeah.
I think it's significant that Caleb was from the tribe of Judah as well.
Yeah. Yes. We could talk all day about that. And Tom has some teachings about the significance of Judah and the Judah / to the Jew first principle. Yeah. Which plays out a lot. We've already seen it several times as we've watched the ordering of the camp and the tribes, that Judah always goes first. So, yeah. Anything else? This is great. So, I think that, I think this is about the Lord. I think Caleb and Joshua, Caleb is speaking here, but he and Joshua are like-minded, so I think we can pull Joshua in here too, is that they see the same, right? What's happening is they're all seeing the same thing. But it's this reality, like what we're seeing here is where, how do I say this? Is where the majority, maybe, of the people of Israel are in there as far as their maturity in this relationship that's building with the Lord versus where Joshua and Caleb and maybe even Moses and Aaron and things like that might be. Because the way I see what happens in the wilderness, even up to this point when they're grumbling and complaining, and even back in Exodus when they come out and they're like, we don't have any water. That's a fair complaint, to be honest. It's like, you brought us out and we don't have any water and we don't have any food. Like, what are we supposed to do? Like, right? Like, we know, like, I think back to, like, some, in college, like, my I had to take a general like psychology class as part of my undergrad, and then I was a business major, and we had an org behavior philosophy, so we had some psychology in our org behavior, and there's like these hierarchies of needs, right? It's like you have before you can address anything else, you have to have food, water, and shelter. And then you can start dealing with these higher level needs, right? You can start building this, but you have to have your basic needs taken care of before you can meet all these other needs. And so we see this, I think we see this building as we kind of even look at this climbing the mountain, as we can look at this going up this ordering of needs, right? Before they can address how do we host the presence of the Lord, they need to have food, water, and shelter. So they say, and so like I see that, I'm like fair complaints. And he gives them to them, right? Like he supernaturally is giving them food and water. Mm-hmm. And we don't really see any concern about shelter. So they're all doing fine. And we find out towards the end of the Torah, their clothes and their shoes don't wear out. Like there's like supernatural provision for all of their basic needs the whole time they're in the wilderness. Like this is kind of amazing. So in addition to all of the rest of what's happening, but what I see, my point is that I'm not really doing a very good job of explaining, is that there's like this father relationship that's being built. Is they've come out of Egypt, they've come out of slavery, they've come out of really not having their own, they don't really have the ability to make decisions about how they live their lives, into this wilderness scenario where God's like, we're gonna go to this really great land, but in the meantime you have to trust me. But they haven't been in a situation where they can live in a way that actually serves the Lord until now. And so it's this like, okay, how do we do this? And how do we know this is better? And so it's like this building trust. Like it's a relationship building process is what it is.
It is, and I'm probably more guilty of this than most. It is very difficult to surrender common sense to faith.
Yes. Yeah, and so I think the wrestle is fair, and I think actually that's I kind of choose, I guess, to look at a lot of this as the mercy of the Lord, to see that like he's willing to be faithful and uphold the covenant, despite the fact that humanity will also always, like just like you're saying, be like, no, I want to do what I think is right. Because but it's like it's this constant wrestle and learning to submit to the fact that we always have a very limited perspective, and our brains just can't handle that. Our finite brains just cannot handle the infinite. They just can't. And yet God chose to establish His kingdom through us. God chose to have His name known through us, right? And so this is like what's like forever kind of amazing to me. It's like they like even in this situation that we're talking about, it's like most of them are like not getting it. They don't have enough faith and trust in the Lord yet that despite what they're seeing in front of them, He has a way, right? And Joshua and Caleb do, which is why, and I want us to get to this is how we're going to get to the very end, is that I want to make sure we get to 15 because of the shift of what we see happen in the narrative is actually really amazing. But I don't know. I think this is what we see here, is that there's still more of a maturing process that needs to happen, because they don't yet have full, even though they have God's manifest presence in the midst of them and they've experienced the Exodus, they're just not sure how far this goes. And so they're continuing, I think they're kind of continuing to have to figure that out. Okay. So let's keep going. Chapter 14. So this is the whole, all the wrestling and all the back and forth about, and God finally kind of saying, you're not going to get to go in. None of this generation will get to go into the land, right? Except for Joshua and Caleb. And I think somewhere, I don't know that I have the verse written down specifically, but somewhere in this chapter is where it says they have a different spirit in them, I believe. But I don't know that I have the verse. Oh, maybe I do. Maybe I did write it down.
Verse 24.
Yes. Yep. Yes. Yeah, so this is actually, I want us to talk about this section. So just as, again, part of our recap. So even in the midst of this, the glory of the Lord is appearing in the tabernacle with Moses. But they're having this conversation, right? It's like the Lord is asking Moses, how long are these people going to treat me like this? How long are these people going to not believe and not trust me? And I think what's interesting is in verse 13, Moses' response back to the Lord is, the Egyptians are going to hear about this. Because you brought us up by your power from among them. They will tell the residents of this land about you, and already they have heard that you, Adonai, are in the midst of this people, and you, Adonai, have been seen eye to eye, that your cloud remains over them, and that in a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, you go before them. If you kill these people, because this is another one of these negotiations that the Lord kind of wants to kill the people. Which, does he really?
No.
Why does he say that? Why does he say he wants to wipe out the nation? Why would he say that if he doesn't really? He didn't forget. He didn't forget that he told Noah that he's never going to wipe people off the earth. But he's not killing the whole earth. It's just a group of people. But why would he do this? Why, if he's not really going to do it, why would he say it?
My first blush response is to provoke intercession.
Okay.
To provoke Moses is standing up and saying, no, wait. And, even before that, the one verse that jumped out at me just reading it again is verse 9, where Caleb and Joshua say to the people, don't rebel against Adonai. Mm-hmm. And don't be afraid of the people of the land. I think a lot of the people's response, even the spies that gave a bad report, their response was fear. Mm-hmm. And right there, Joshua and Caleb were saying, no, God is with us. We can do this.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. And don't rebel. And that's where I think God is saying to Moses, their rebellion is going to cause me to wipe them out. Mm-hmm. And that provokes intercession.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a situation where whether or not he would do it might be questioned in your mind, but the fact that he could, there is no doubt.
Right.
Exactly.
Yes.
I would say too, seems like he's revealed, I was gonna say the same thing, that Daniel did. But in addition to that, it's like he's just in bringing that type of a judgment.
Right.
But he's also God of mercy.
Yes.
And so he's kind of showing his ways, like if you will intercede on the behalf, just like Yeshua, ultimately he's gonna be our mediator, then he can relent and not carry out that judgment.
Right.
That was righteous.
Yeah. Yeah. I think yes. I think all of this is true. I mean, yeah. Go ahead, Lori.
Also, their opinion of the land.
Yeah.
The land itself. Because, I mean, none of this is a big surprise. Back in Exodus 3, when he first told them he was taking them into the land, back in 3:8, it says, so I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians to bring them up out of that land into a good and large land, a land flowing with milk and honey, into a place the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. He already told them there's people in this land.
Right.
I mean, none of this is a big surprise. But their report on the land, it says the land we passed to explore devours its residents. So, I mean, they're even going beyond complaining about the inhabitants. When the Lord gives you what he's called a good and large land, and your response is, that land will devour us. I mean, basically, it's like he's giving them this amazing gift, and that scorning to that level to give that kind of report about the land itself. Yeah, out of fear or not, but I mean, So when the Lord says he's going to bring a plague and destroy them all, he's still telling Moses, but I'm going to make you a great nation, which he's done that before.
Right.
I'll make you, because his goal is still to get his people into that land.
Yes.
Period.
Yes.
And what I hear in you saying that, though, is it's more than just a fear. It's almost a terror, panic response that the spies bring back. Like, it's deeper. It's paralyzing to them. And so they say the land will devour us if we try to take it.
Yeah, and I think, yes. It's a big deal, and I mean, honestly, it's like, yes, this is terrifying. If you go in, and everyone that you see looks like a giant, and these are people who live there and are an organized society and have military forces and all of these things, it's a terrifying thing.
Right.
And I think that what we're getting at, and what I kind of want us to see, and I don't want to, I don't know, I tend to hesitate to like super hyper spiritualize everything, but I think that part of this is like, do you learn to take what you see and make your own judgment about what the options of response are, or do you say, okay, I went and saw all of this, because this is what Joshua and Caleb did, I think, is Joshua and Caleb went and saw it and said, I see all of these things, so I'm going to take all of this information that I have and say, okay, Lord, now what?
Exactly.
Right? It's like, if he knows all of this is there, which he does, and he's saying, I have a way to bring you in the land, and what your eyes can see, those things don't match up, that's where you say, okay, so he sees more than I do. Like, he knows something I don't know. Maybe I should ask him about it, right? This is what we see all throughout, and this is what we see even, my small group has just been studying Acts, and this is what we see, like, how the gospel spreads doesn't make any sense. And the gospel only spreads through persecution.
Yeah.
The gospel only goes out of Jerusalem because Stephen is martyred. The gospel only goes beyond Judea and Samaria because Paul is in prison. And they take him in Roman captivity to Rome. That's the only way the gospel gets there. And that was not their plan. It didn't make any sense.
And I think what I'm hearing you say and what I'm hearing Lori say is that effectively Joshua and Caleb saw what was in the land through the eyes of trusting God. Whereas the rest of the spies, all they saw was what terrified them. And so that was the main difference between their reports.
Yeah.
And the terror drove the people to the point of saying, we will rebel against God. That's why God said, I will destroy you and make a nation out of Moses and Joshua and Caleb. There's a pretty clear distinction between the terror and the trust.
Yes. Sandy, did you have anything?
Yeah. So in one of those books you recommended, the extra Torah reading with Rabbi, there was a saying in there where, so they're in the land for 40 days. I mean, think about it. So how did they eat and how did they live for those 40 days? But that it was said that God actually, like, struck people and that fell before. Now, this isn't in the Torah, but he's saying that that's written about it, that he actually struck them when there was giants or whatever, struck them down so that they could proceed and live there for the 40 days. And so then the actual saying that we're going to be wiped out was coming against God, God's miracle of providing for them the 40 days while they were in the land. I just thought that was really interesting.
That is interesting.
So that could really
That's part
upset
of it too.
at night.
Yeah, for sure.
Because here he provided a miracle for them to walk in the land for
Right,
40 days.
yeah. He still sustained them through that. Because, there's 12 guys. It wouldn't have been hard for any of these nations to pick them off.
Right, and yet they all were about to land,
Lori.
And I think it's kind of interesting too, because right before this, when we get into the book of Numbers, the first thing the Lord's doing is head count to let them know you are a mighty army.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's already selected this army. Now he's like, go into the land. And it would be like, so here's this mighty army that goes, nah, I'm not gonna go into war. So it's like, he already showed them, yeah, you may see a lot here, but you just did a head count, guys, and you're a big group of people. And so it wasn't like, I feel like he was progressing, getting them ready. You've got your army. Yeah, you're going to have to take the land, but you're a great nation now. You can do this. And then these guys come back and go, no, we can't. Never mind. Don't want to do it. So I think that's, in a sense, kind of discouraging too, because he's trying to set them up for success, but he also wants them to trust him.
Mm-hmm.
I've made you into a great army. Now I'm going to go with you, and we're going to go do this.
Right.
And they're like, no.
Yeah. This is a difficult situation to deal with. It really is, to see all this tension. But I think, like I said, I think a lot of this is about revealing what's in their own hearts, and then even getting back to why God kind of makes this statement of like, I'm going to wipe them out, but I'm going to make you, meaning Moses, into a great nation. And Moses is like, hold on. You can't do this, because the Egyptians know that you delivered us, and they're gonna be mad. And then he repeats back to him. I love this. Moses says back to the Lord in verse 17. So please let Adonai show his strength, just as you've spoken, saying, Adonai is slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression. Still, he does not leave the guilty unpunished, bringing the iniquity of the father and the children to the third and fourth generations. Forgive the guiltiness of the people in accordance with the greatness of your loving kindness, just as you have pardoned this people from Egypt until now. And so he's like basically right, saying back to him his own character, which the Lord knows. And like, that's what the Lord, again, not that the Lord is like not speaking truthfully, but it's this whole like, do you know who I am? Right? And so then Moses' response back, which again, he keeps in there the part that he doesn't leave the guilty unpunished. So Moses is not expecting like zero consequences for this, right? Like he's not even telling the Lord, like, you have to let us, you have to have grace for us. He doesn't say that. He says, I know there's consequences for this, but you are still a God full of loving kindness. And so, and then they get into this whole, and Adonai says, I've forgiven you, but none of these people who saw my glory and my miraculous signs performed in Egypt in the wilderness, yet tested me these 10 times, which there's an interesting, I didn't print it out, but there's an interesting listing of what those 10 tests are. Did not obey my voice. Not one of them will see the land I promised their forefathers. None of these who treated me with contempt will see it. Oh, Lord, help us never. Let us never treat the Lord with contempt. Like that one, like that gets me. I'm like, oh. Anyway, but this is where it talks about Caleb having the different spirit, because he's wholeheartedly behind me. I will bring him into the land where he went, and his offspring will inherit it.
Joshua and Caleb were Marines.
There you go. That's it.
Yep.
There you go.
That mindset, though, completely different.
Yeah.
Wholehearted.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I'm going to keep us moving a little bit so we can keep getting, because I know we could talk about this all day, but I do want to remind you, we don't have to go, I won't read through back all of this, but when I read some of this, I also think back to Leviticus 26, where he goes through the blessings that your faithfulness, and that if you keep my statutes and keep the mitzvot, then you will have rain, and the land will yield good fruit, and you will be able to stay in the land. And if you don't, then the land, after many warnings and attempts to turn your hearts back, the land will literally spit you out. And so really, even though they're not even in the land yet, this is actually very consistent with what the Lord has previously said back in Leviticus 26. And we continue to see this play out even as time goes forward. I've been reading in the Bible, or the reading schedule that I've been doing, I've been reading Jeremiah, which is, which is a difficult book to get through. There's a lot of you people are not doing what you're supposed to. Like, we're in exile, and it's like we have to be because we didn't listen. But I was reading Jeremiah 31 this week, which of course is one of the New Covenant texts, and it's like, I'm going to bring you back. You are going to come back. I'm going to save the remnant. I'm going to make a great nation out of you. I'm going, all your enemies will be defeated. All these like amazing things. But even so it's interesting reading that alongside this. It's like, yes, there's always consequence for sin and for going against what the Lord says and not having faith in him. But he always brings you back, which is what even is happening here. It's like, yes, this generation doesn't get to go in. But despite what he said to Moses, he's not making it. He's not going and choosing a new people or having kind of a new nation come from Moses or whatever. It's still the same people. It's just basically delayed by a generation, right? And so, and of course we see. I don't know. There's just so much humanity in all of this, right? Because they learn this, right, that they're not going to be able to go into the land. But their children will, and all of these, it goes on and says all of these things. And the 10 men who brought back the bad report are killed, they die in this plague of the Lord. So there's even that immediate consequence. And it says it then in chapter 14, verse 39, when Moses related these things to all of Bnei Israel, the people mourned bitterly. And then what do? They rose up the next morning and went up to the high mountain, saying, look, let's go up to the place which Adonai promised, for we have sinned. But Moses said, why are you disobeying the mouth of Adonai? That will never succeed. You should not go up, because Adonai will not be among you, and you will be defeated before your enemies. Goodness, can't talk this morning. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites are there in front of you, and you will fall by the sword. Adonai will not be with you, because you turned away from following Adonai. But presumptuously they went up to the high mountain country, though neither the ark of Adonai's covenant nor Moses moved from within the camp. The Amalekites and the Canaanites living in the mountain country came down, attacked them, and beat them down all the way back to Hormah. So, do you think they have learned yet? Don't move if the Lord doesn't move. This is, but this is, again, like, there's so much humanity in this, because that's like, you learn the consequences and you're like, no, I want to do what you said, I want to do it, right? I mean, I don't have my own children, but I've watched this play out in many families, right? Like, that's part of, like, your children learning, right? Mm-hmm. That's part of child development. That's part of your brain, is you have to develop those neural pathways of, like, no, when they say this is the consequence, that's the consequence. And if you miss the window of opportunity to make the right choice and you receive the consequence, you don't get to go back and make a different choice. We all had to learn that. We all are still having to learn that sometimes, right? Like that's part of developing your understanding of authority and submission to authority, right? And it happens often in very small children, and hopefully by the time we get to adults, we've learned on some level, but we still usually need reminding. But it's just this, and this is a big deal with them, like, right? Like, that's painful. So they've now lost 10 leaders from Israel to this plague of Adonai, and then they try to go. We don't. It doesn't tell us how many people they lost, but I'm sure they lost some in this. No, we take it back. We want to go. Doesn't work that way. Okay. We're going to keep going, because we're going to get to the last section. Or Lori's going to come after me. Okay, but this is actually really significant, and I don't know, actually even know what I was reading. I was just kind of skimming through various commentaries last night, so I don't even know where I was reading about this, but we have this interesting shift, right? Like, there's just been this whole thing about basically the consequences for this generation, this first generation. They're not going to come back in, but he says the next generation is going to go. And so then, and they go and they have this really less than awesome moment of trying to go where the Lord didn't tell them to go. And then we get to chapter 15. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Bnei Israel and say to them, when you enter the land I'm giving you." So now we're back to talking about when you go in the land, right? This is good news, actually. This is really good news.
It's still gonna happen.
Right, it's still going to happen. He's like, all right, you screwed up. All right, so let's keep working towards the goal here. It's like, oh man, Lord, you're so kind. So speak to Bnei Israel and say to them, when you enter the land I'm giving you, where you will make your homes and you are presenting a fire offering to Adonai, a burnt offering or a sacrifice to mark fulfilling a vow, a freewill offering or during a moedim, to present a pleasing aroma to Adonai from the herd or from the flock. The one bringing the offering is to bring blah blah blah, so on and so forth. And we have kind of a reiteration of some of these sacrifices and these offerings, which is meant to kind of put your brain back to the fullness of what are these sacrifices for, why are they bringing these offerings, and how that whole process works. So this is just kind of a recounting of that and saying basically like, no, this is still in place. This process and this relational, this very relational structure is still there, right? Like the tabernacle is still there, it's still functioning. His presence is still among them. And so when they do get into the land, they're going to continue this, and they're going to continue what God has already said. It's just going to be kind of a different. It's not going to be this first generation, and it's going to take them 40 years to get there. And this is we also have kind of skipping down to verses 13 and 14. Everyone native born is to do these things, when bringing when bringing a fire offering as a pleasant aroma to Adonai. Whenever an outsider resides with you, or whoever is among you for your generations to come, and he is to present a fire offering as a fragrant aroma to Adonai, as you do, he must do exactly as you're doing. And so, who's the outsider? Who are the outsiders? Gentiles, right? Everyone's always welcome to come in the family, right? Yeah. This is good news, since a lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us in the room are Gentile. This is good news.
And that goes back to language earlier in the Torah where God welcomes the outsider to dwell among the people of Israel.
Right.
So it's not a new concept.
Right. Yeah, because what's the calling? What's the primary calling of Israel?
To bless the nations.
To be a light to the nations. Yeah. So it makes sense that the nations would always be welcome among them, within certain guidelines, right? So that's why we have instruction. That's why God's like, okay, so you're going to have these people who want to come, and this is how you welcome them in, and this is what they're required to do. So this is actually really great. And this is going back even to, and so then if we keep going down, I think this is really interesting because some of this even addresses what we were talking about earlier. What we were seeing is that, because one of the things we mentioned earlier that we were seeing when they go in the land is that there is a lot of there's good produce. Like when they do eventually get there, they're not going to have to go in and start from scratch, right? They're not going to have to go in and cultivate, which interestingly enough, when Israel, the current modern state of Israel, was reestablished, they did have to go in and revitalize the land. Like there was a lot of the land that was not producing and was not in good shape, and they've had to work to get the land producing again. But that's not the case here. The case, we know there's a lot of good things in the land. And so in verse 17, speak to Bnei Israel and say to them, when you enter the land to which I am taking you, and you eat some of the food of the land, you are to offer a portion to Adonai. You are to offer up a cake from the first of your ground up meal as an offering from your threshing floor, so you are to lift it up throughout your generations to come. You are to give this offering from the first of your ground up meal. And so it's this first fruits concept that's coming, right? You bring the first of any of your produce to the Lord, but he's saying this about what's already there. when they go in, that you're to bring something. You're to bring this before, even though you didn't even grow it, the first of what you harvest there, you're to bring before the Lord. So that's, they get to take part in that. Okay, so then the second kind of half of 15 here, we get into this the TLV labels 22 through 36 as unintentional versus defiant sin. So this is really interesting, right? And it's basically reiterating this concept that if you unintentionally sin, if you mess up, you get to come back before the Lord, right? You get to, it doesn't, yes, you need to repent. You need to go through these restitution practices. You need to bring the sacrifices and the offerings and all these things, but you're not cast away from the presence. So there is forgiveness available, right? And so it's not this, if you mess up, especially, unintentionally. But that's not the case for, I kind of like this, I think some, I don't know, it's been a while since I've looked at other translations of this. I think some translations put it more as intentional versus unintentional sin. What does somebody else, in verse 30, what does it say? What does verse 30 say in somebody else, in not the TLV?
It says defiant also.
Does it say defiant? What version is that?
It's the new improved version.
The new improved version.
New American Standard.
Okay. Everybody else has TLV probably. I guess I could look it up somewhere. But I don't know. There may be other translations that say intentional or something. I don't know.
Defiantly.
Does it? They all say defiantly.
And in the NIV as well as the TLV.
Okay. So maybe, I don't know. What am I saying? The point is, you get to this section where you have defiant sin, right? You have this. So this is intentional. This is again going back to, if you think back to some of what Kenny has taught of, like, a premeditated murder or burglary or something like that is different than, like, and in the moment, like, your self-defense and you kill someone. These are different things. And here again, we have this reiterating. And what is the consequence if you sin defiantly?
Cut off.
You are cut off. And this is the native or the outsider. The people that is to be cut off from the people because he has despised the word of Adonai and has broken his commandment. That person will certainly be cut off. His guilt will remain on him. And then they give this is a brutal example. The end of this section. While Bnei Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering wood on Shabbat. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and the rest of the assembly. They kept him under arrest, not being clear what was to be done to him. And Adonai said to Moses, "The man has to die." This is a hard one to deal with. The whole assembly is to stone him with stones outside the camp. So the whole assembly took him outside the camp, and they stoned him with stones, and he died just as Adonai commanded Moses. I don't have a lot of suggestion about how we process this one, because this is hard. But I mean, I don't want us to get into this whole is it just and fair that death is the consequence for gathering wood on Shabbat? I don't, because I don't actually think that that's the point of this passage either. But the point is, why is it such a big deal that he's gathering wood on Shabbat?
Because we're not supposed to labor on Shabbat.
Yeah. Yeah. And what does choosing to do work like that on Shabbat say about how you view the Lord?
You don't honor his voice.
Okay.
You don't obey his word.
You don't think you can provide.
You don't think you can provide? Uh-huh.
You're being defiant.
Being defiant. Yeah.
Don't say it wasn't necessary, I say it was.
Yeah. It's this. Yeah. Yeah. It's this whole idea of You know, God has given commandments, and God has said what he will do if you obey them. And he has said with again, going back to Leviticus 26, gives a lot of consequence if you don't obey the Lord. And so in some sense, again, I'm not commenting on whether I think it's quote unquote fair that this person was put to death versus given some other consequence. But I mean, I think part of what we're supposed to take away is that Shabbat is a big deal. This Shabbat keeping commandment is a big deal. Like, it's not like we kind of like, and there's a lot of other things that come into play with this, so I don't actually want to say too much about this, but this matters a lot to the Lord, is what this tells us, because the Lord, I think what we need to understand is the Lord is just and fair, and so yes, in our humanity, and again, going forward, there's other situations there's other things to consider, and there's other things that are said about different things, and including Shabbat as we go forward. But it never changes that this is something that matters to the Lord. And I think that if the Lord is willing to give this deep of a consequence like that, like what that needs to tell us is we need to think seriously about this too.
I wonder too if it doesn't show us the difference between the holiness of God and willful rebellion against his word.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we see it earlier in this portion, and we see it in the next portion, how seriously God takes rebellion against his word. We see it in God saying that generation will not enter the land. 1 year for every day they were in it, they will not enter the land. We see it in the next portion with the rebellion of Korah, that his entire family.
Yeah,
so,
15,000 people die in the next portion.
So
it's a big deal.
God takes rebellion seriously, even if it's over something that doesn't seem very important to us.
And I think we have to remember too, like, this person knew.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this isn't just like, again, because it goes back to the difference between this unintentional sin and a defiant. Like, if somehow there's somebody in the midst of Israel that doesn't know you don't gather wood on Shabbat, I don't think this would be the consequence. This is someone who knew and chose, right? So.
They did afterwards.
Yes. I mean, yes. But anyway, yeah, I don't want to. It's hard. These are hard passages to deal with. Like, it's hard for me to read and be like, man, he's gathering wood, which seems like such a small thing.
Yeah.
And he was like, the commandment was that he be killed. Like, it's a hard thing, but it's like.
But gathering wood provides for yourself. And
Yeah.
You know, it's actually part of a necessity.
Right, and part of Shabbat, part of entering into Shabbat, right, is planning for it, right? It's like, I have 6 other days. We probably should have gathered a little extra yesterday, right? You know, something like that. I know I'm not trying to make light of it, but that's part of it, right? Is that if you know Shabbat is coming, it happens the same time every week. You have to plan for it, right?
It's also like the manna in the wilderness.
Yeah.
You know that there's going to be one day when you cannot gather, so gather a double
Right,
portion.
and it's the only day they're allowed to gather extra. If they gather extra the other days, it goes bad.
Right, so it's a reinforcement of something they should have already known.
Yeah.
Do you feel like partially or the extreme result of this, what Adonai commanded with the death of this man, if the community tolerates defiant sin against God for something that to him was really important, if this guy gets away with it, then this guy gets away with it, then this guy gets away with it. There had to be a consequence to show the importance that God said don't do it, and the community cannot tolerate somebody doing that. And we are still walking in an early part of their relationship with the Lord. We also have to remember his very presence is right there, manifest presence. Everybody can see it, right there in the midst of the community. And he wants them to be holy, and he wants to be able to dwell in the midst. The people cannot, the continuance of the testing of God, the defiance, I'm not going to go into the land, now you said don't do it, and I am going to go into the land. I mean, we keep seeing this struggle, and the Lord cannot turn a blind eye to this at this point. If these people are supposed to represent him and be a blessing to the nations, he's got to get them holy. And so it might seem like an extreme consequence at this point in time, but he's trying to set them up to be his representatives. Mm-hmm. And to the people that carry his name. You don't want a defiant person carrying your name and representing you to the nation.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, like, again, like, yes, this is definitely in the early days of, right, again, going back to talking about this, the Lord is really trying to get them to mature into this relationship with him. And he's really fathering them through this. And so he, on some level, the only way you learn is if the consequence that you're told is going to happen actually happens. And so I think that there is this element that you're right, there has to be, this is something that's so important to him, and it's such a gift to the people. Like, no other culture gets a day off.
It wasn't to worship. It wasn't for God's benefit. It was for theirs.
Right.
Right.
He was trying to do them a favor.
Right. And right. That's what Yeshua says later. Man wasn't made for the Shabbat. Shabbat was made for man. Like, this is a gift to you.
Well, I think it's too, all this is so good, everything everybody's saying. I think it's worth noting too, because prior to that, the Lord has said there is to be one law that actually is translated to Torah.
Mm-hmm.
And one ordinance for you and for the alien who sojourns with you. So we already see this applies to the Gentiles as well. Mm-hmm. And anyway, that's all I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to me that Yeshua would say that, what you just mentioned, when he is called the Lord of Shabbat.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord of Shabbat says Shabbat is for man, not for God.
Mm-hmm.
Let's think about that.
Yeah, and the reality is it's for both, but it's for both in the sense that there's
that there's
relationship in it, right? Like we talk about all the time. Like that's one of the reasons. Like we could have a service on any day of the week, and it would probably be great, right? Like it would be great. But there's something about Shabbat. There's something about you have ordered your life to have this space of time open and come and worship together corporately, right? And that's like it's different. It's different. Like I love when we have other services and other things. Shabbat is different. It just is. So anyway, all right, we've got 9 minutes, Lori. Here we go. We made it. Lori wanted us to get to this part about tzitzit, and so we have arrived at the tzitzit section.
I think we're segueing into it pretty good.
Yeah. So let's just read this section because Lori was mentioning it before we started that there's an interesting what God says about why He's commanding this is interesting, and I think we'll see if we can what we think about it. So Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Bnei Israel, say to them that they are to make for themselves tzitzit on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and they are to put a blue cord on each tzitzit. It will be your own tzitzit, so whenever you look at them, you will remember all the mitzvot of Adonai and do them, and not go spying out after your own hearts and your own eyes, prostituting yourselves. This way you will remember and obey all my mitzvot, and you will be holy to your God. I am Adonai your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai your God. Okay. So why are they supposed to wear tzitzit? Lori, why are they supposed to wear tzitzit?
There's it right there.
He's causing them to remember.
Yes.
And so to me, and I kind of mentioned this, you know, I see a lot of people get real enthusiastic on the Messianic movement, and so we've got a lot of guys, you know, tying tzitzits onto stuff, which I'm not really want to go there a whole lot, but the command had more to do with remembering, and when he says, so that they don't go spying out after their own hearts, this is coming right on the end of the Lord sends the spies into the land to check this out, and they come back with a bad report. And so I'm sitting there going, well, is this to remember also, like, if he's talking about spying out with your own eyes, remember what you're supposed to be seeing, what you're supposed to be looking for. Remember the holiness, remember my word, remember what happened to those who spied out with their own eyes and came back with a bad report. So I think there's like a heavier, because remember is in there twice.
And to do.
This is more than a accessory to your garment.
Right.
This is a remembering of what has happened when you don't follow the Torah, when you don't follow his words.
And also remembering which report to believe.
Right.
Yes.
My report or what he has said.
And I would say too, you know, because God's ways are Hebraic, in like eat this, take this into your body, build this, live in it. These tzitzit, they have knots, you know, feel them, and when you do, remember why you have them on. To remember my commandments, to do them, etc., to trust me. And then I go back to what he had said previously, there shall be one Torah for you and for those who sojourn with you. So God knows the heart of why someone would be wanting to wear those
Yes.
or not. He knows the heart.
And I think there's a phrase here that we have to keep in mind, and I noticed it in a number of translations, where it says in verse 39, and do not, you will remember all the mitzvot of Adonai and do them, and not go spying out after your own hearts and your own eyes, prostituting yourself. I think that is exactly what God is highlighting. It says if you do not remember and go out and you go after your own heart, you're essentially prostituting yourself performing. And that's a very serious thing. It's almost, if I understand it correctly, it's almost the reason why the people rebel. Is because they're seeking after their own hearts and essentially prostituting their love for God. It's serious.
Yeah. And ongoing and huge. Yeah.
Yes.
Spiritual adultery.
And so the tzitzit remind us of the urgency to be holy and to follow after the voice of God and to be obedient.
I would say too, because they go with you, I don't know, that they go with you wherever you go. So you're to write, you know, the Torah on your doorposts, on your gates, and when you come in, you go out and remember all these things that God has us do to remember. Build a stone of remembrance. Don't forget. Tell the story. Have the Passover Seder. And this is something that, like I said, it's with you in the situation. let me remember my God when I see that.
Yeah.
To obey him.
Yeah, so I think it's, yeah, I mean, I think part of this too is that, and this is one of the things that we love about a lot of the Jewish practices is that they engage our other senses, right? So yeah, there's now given something that's visible and tangible to remind them of the covenant. So I think that there's an element to like, God is kind of saying, these people need they need a reminder. They do, yes. But it's kind of just like, so I think, so again, and going back to like, there's a corporate and an individual aspect, right? So I would like, through the years I've read the Torah, I'm always like, I read this, I'm like, His presence is in your midst, you can see it. Why is this so hard?
We have an enemy.
And yet, things that become, we've talked about this before, things that are familiar to you start to lose some of their significance.
Yeah.
And so I think, and that's a corporate reality, right? Like, yes, but as these people are growing, some of these people they're living on the edges, that pillar of smoke might look kind of small to them, or I don't know, whatever. I don't know. But my point is, so now I feel like he's like, okay, each person is part of this, right? Because that's even why, like, he is willing to, like, we see a lot of times when there's consequences for the whole, even though it's only a part that rebels. But there's also, like, in this situation, it's the 10 that rebel that perish, and the 2 that are faithful that are not. So he will make those distinctions individually. And I think that this, in some sense, is now an individual reminder of keep my commandments. Mm-hmm. And don't go, and yeah, so like the verse that we were pointing out, this don't go after your own heart. It's this, you're now wearing something. These men are now wearing something, putting something on every day that's like, whose covenant? Like whose instruction am I following, and whose heart am I following? God's heart or my own heart? And so, because and especially having this instruction just on the heels of this really big consequence for this, and we don't have a great sense of like time that it's like that these happen. But it is the order that it's recorded, and that does mean something. So we don't know how much time has passed between this man being stoned for gathering wood on the Shabbat and this giving of this, but still, for our mind, which does mean something. The fact that this is the order it is in the Torah means something to us. That, it's important. Like, remembering his commandment every day is really important. And I'm not going to chase the rabbit of who now should be wearing tzitzit, because it's 9:46, and also I will.
It's as good a reason as any.
It's as good a reason as any, and I'm sure we could open up quite an interesting conversation about that, but we don't need to. But the point is, it is an instruction, and it becomes a Jewish identity marker to wear tzitzit. So that is something to consider. But I think on the heels of what has just happened, I think a lot of this is about God saying, okay, I'm going to give each individual person something to remind them every day of what voice they need to listen to.
And I think that's also why Yeshua rebuked the Pharisees so clearly and distinctly and often, because they had forgotten.
Yeah, and they were also making a show of it, like, right? Like, they're like, your tzitzit are long, and your tefillin are, huge, and it's like, that's not the point. That point is actually not that other people see it, it's that it helps you keep your own heart in line.
Exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't show other people you're holy. It's a reminder to you.
Yes. Yes.
You need to be holy.
Yes. Yes.
Before the Lord.
So, Lord, we thank you for Shabbat. We thank you for your word, Lord. We thank you that you are kind, that you are slow to anger, that you are kind towards us, Lord. And we thank you that we get the privilege and honor and joy of studying your word and reading your Torah year after year. and learning more about your heart and your character each year as we go through this, Lord. So Lord, I do ask that your presence would be with us. We thank you for Shabbat. We thank you for this day and this set apart time to enjoy your presence together, Lord. And I do just ask that you would be with us in service. I ask that you would be with the Kepharim as they get ready to go on their retreat this afternoon, with the leaders as they've been working on preparing it, and the speakers and everything, Lord. So I just ask that your presence would go with them as well, Lord. We just thank you, Lord. We just thank you, Lord, for who you are. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen.
Thank you very much.